I thank the chair and North Bengal University for giving me the opportunity to present my paper in this seminar. The title of my paper is Unstable Species, Entangled Worlds, Rethinking Animality and Power in Orwell's Animal Farm. George Orwell's Animal Farm has long been read within the circumscribed horizon of Russian Revolution, the famous Bolshevik Revolution, that is. Its narrative, treated as a transparent allegorical transcription of the rise of Joseph Stalin. While such reading retains undeniable historical validity, there is a research gap that I have seen between the political ideologies of Animal Farm and the phenomenality, the post-structural criticism and post-human realization of human, non-human entanglement. The research gap is something that got me to think of my methodology of reducing this novel to a different undeniability and the eliminating of risks that has conformed and confined the novel into the closed system of equivalences, thereby obscuring its more unsettling philosophical provocation, which is my methodology. For the novel persistently gestures towards something that exceeds allegory, a meditation on the instability of knowledge, the fragility of ethical relations, and the porous boundaries between human and non-human life. The first point of my findings are fragile life worlds, phenomenology, and the distortion of experience. At its most immediate level, the novel unfolds as a phenomenological drama. The animals inhabit what Edmund Husserl would call a life world, Lebenswelt, the pre-reflective horizon within which meaning is constituted. In his book, The Idea One, Husserl asserts that, and I quote, every consciousness is consciousness of something. And I end my quote. Emphasizing that experience is always already structured by intentionality. Yet, Orwell's narrative reveals how precious and precarious this structure can be at the same time when subjected to ideological manipulations. The ship's chant, and I quote, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, initially appears as a stable intentional object, a phrase through which the animal organized their understanding of the world. However, its later transformation into, and I quote, 4 legs good, 2 legs better, does not merely indicate political betrayal. It demonstrates a reconfiguration of the very conditions under which meaning is apprehended. Consciousness itself is redirected, its objects subtly altered without the animal's full awareness. Boxer, the famous figure, perhaps the most tragic figure in this phenomenological landscape, embodies this vulnerability with particular poignancy. His maxims, I will work harder and Napoleon is always right, are not simply ideological slogans, but structuring principles of his experience. They delimit what can be thought, felt, and questioned. And yet, Orwell introduces moments of hesitation. Boxer's dim awareness that, and I quote, the others said of Squealer that he could turn black into white. And I end my quote, which suggests a crack within the intentional structure, a fleeting recognition that reality might not coincide with its representation. Thus, phenomenology in Animal Farm does not yield a stable account of consciousness. Rather, it reveals its susceptibility to distortion. The animal's life world is not simply inhabited. It is continuously reshaped, warped, narrowed, and reoriented by forces that remain only partially visible to them. And I go to my second point, the ethical demand of other, as continuation. This phenomenological instability which I have been speaking about leads directly into the ethical terrain articulated by Emmanuel Levinas. In his book, Totality and Infinity, Levinas writes, and I quote, "The face speaks to me and thereby invites me into a relation," end my quote, insisting that ethics begins in an encounter that exceeds knowledge. The other is not an object to be comprehended, but a presence that demands response. In Orwell's novel, this demand is most powerfully embodied in Boxer. His suffering, and I quote, "his sides were bleeding, his great muscles quivering," and end my quote. It is not reducible to his allegorical function as proletariat. It confronts both reader and fellow animals with an ethical appeal that cannot be fully articulated within the language of the farm. Boxer's final transportation in the van marked horse slaughterer and glue boiler, end my quote, constitutes a profound ethical rupture. What renders this moment so devastating is the animal's inability to respond adequately. Clover senses that something is wrong, yet her awareness remains inchoate. Benjamin understands, but too late. The ethical relation is thus suspended, deferred, and ultimately foreclosed. Levinas's warning against the reduction of the other to the same finds a chilling resonance here. Boxer is not encountered in his singularity, but absorbed into a system that exploits and discards him. The next point is language as violence. If the ethical failure of the farm is rooted in a failure to respond to alterity, it is also sustained by the operation of language, which both reveals and conceals. Jacques Derrida's critique of the category the animal in the book The Animal That Therefore I Am is particularly illuminating here. Derrida observes that this term is, and I quote, a word that men have given themselves the right to give, and end my quote, thereby exposing its homogenizing violence. Orwell's animals are similarly constituted as a collective comrades. Yet this unity is continuously fractured by hierarchy and difference. The seventh commandment inscribed on the barn wall initially promises a stable ethical framework, but their gradual alteration reveals the instability of language itself. The climactic formulation, and I quote, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others, is very relevant in our present political condition, where all human beings are equal, and Americans are more than equal than the others. Or all human beings are equal, but some human beings that are privileged, like Donald Trump or Narendra Modi, are more equal than the others, like ayatollahs and others is not merely paradoxical. It is not merely paradoxical. It exemplifies how language can sustain contradiction without collapsing. It goes beyond the truth. Every truth is in untruth, and every untruth is truth. That is how we move to post-truth. Derrida's assertion in Of Grammatology, and I quote, that there is nothing outside the text, acquires a particularly material resonance here. The truth of the farm is literally written and rewritten on the barn wall. Reality becomes inseparable with the inscription. When the animals, and I quote, remembered that the sixth commandment decreed, no animal shall kill any other animal, only to find it amended without cause, we witness not simple deception, but the production of a new reality through textual intervention. The final scene, and I quote, it was impossible to say which was which, and I end my quote, thus emerges as the culmination of a linguistic process that has gradually eroded the distinction between human and animal. The boundary collapses not through biological transformation, but through discursive transfiguration. Next point of mine is worldhood, network, and withdrawal. This linguistic instability, as I was talking about, inevitably reshapes the ontology of the farm itself. Martin Heidegger's distinction between world-forming humans and world-poor animals, articulated in his book The Fundamental Concept of Metaphysics, is implicitly challenged by Orwell's depiction of animals, who actively constituted a shared world. Through labor, memory, and inscription, the animals do not merely inhabit a world, they bring it into being. Yet this world is marked by distortion. In Being and Time, Heidegger writes, truth is untruth. And I end my quote, indicating that every disclosure conceals as much as it reveals. The gradual alteration of commandment exemplifies this dynamic. The animal's world is not destroyed but subtly reconfigured, its horizon shifting in ways that render the past inaccessible. At this point, Bruno Latour's actor network theory deepens the analysis. In his book, In Reassembling the Social, Latour asserts, and I quote, an actor is what is made to act by many others, and end my quote, thereby dispersing agency across a network of relations. On the farm, power is not localized in Napoleon alone or Snowball, but emerges from an assemblage of actants. The barn wall, the paint, the dog, the animal's habit of repetition, and the material condition of labor. Authority is thus an effect of relations rather than an intrinsic property. However, even in this relational framework encounters a limit in the thought of Graham Harman. In his book, The Quadruple Object, Harman insists that, and I quote, objects withdraw from all relations, and in my quote, retaining a reality that cannot be fully accessed. This withdrawal is evident in the opacity of Orwell's character. Benjamin's silence, his refusal to participate fully in the interpretive economy of the farm, suggests an interiority that resists both ideological capture and theoretical explanation. Boxer too exceeds his relational role. His being cannot be exhausted by his function within the network. Thus, the ontology of the animal farm oscillates between relational entanglement and irreducible withdrawal, revealing a word that is both constituted and incomplete. My next point is companion species and the collapse of relational ethics. It is precisely this tension between relation and withdrawal that lends particular poignancy to Donna Haraway's notion of, quote-unquote, companion species. In her book, The Companion Species Manifesto, Haraway writes, and I quote, beings do not pre-exist their relatings, and end my quote, emphasizing the co-constitutive nature of life. The early moments of animalism, the old mage's vision, the communal singing of beasts of England, gestures towards such a relational ontology, a fragile sense of shared becoming. Yet this possibility is systematically undermined. The pig's gradual assumption of human habits, sleeping in beds, drinking alcohol, walking on two legs, signals not merely political corruption but the reassertion of hierarchical distinctions that negate the possibility of genuine companionship. By the novel's conclusion, when the pigs and humans are indistinguishable, what has been lost is not only equality, but the very possibility of an ethical relation grounded in mutual recognition. Haraway's vision thus haunts the text as an unrealized alternative, a glimpse of what might have been had the animals sustained their initial commitment to collective life. In the conclusion, I would like to bring how Orwell's novel, fable, fairy tale, political allegory, and a text that demands post-human research as well as on trying to understand the relationality of the network between the animals and otherization between the animals. I would like to bring the contemporary geopolitical climate here. In the disturbing afterlife of Animal Farm, it becomes increasingly difficult to ignore the present situation. The ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, with its competing narrative, territorial claim, and strategic recalibration, exemplifies how truth itself becomes a contested terrain, subject to revision and instrumentalization. Similarly, the fraught tension between United States and Iran reveals a global order structured less by stable ethical commitments rather than by shifting alignment of power. So the animals of Animal Farm, like Napoleon, Snowball, Squealer, could be very well interchanged with Vladimir Putin, with Donald Trump, and with Narendra Modi. They're all part of the same rewriting of history, rewriting of truth, rewriting of narrative, and the eraser. So if Donald Trump is erasing moral commitments, if Vladimir Putin is performing the eraser of Russian Revolution, Narendra Modi's history narrative of Hindutva is as much a rewriting of the commandments of Vedas. And therefore, within this volatile configuration, India occupies a complex and often precarious position, negotiating between diplomatic neutrality, economic necessity, and geopolitical pressure. What binds this disparate context is not merely conflict, but the subtle transformation of political language into a tool of normalization, where contradictions are sustained, inequality is justified, and populations habituated to instability. Much like the gradual rewriting of the commandments, contemporary political discourse, which I have discussed, often proceeds through incremental shifts that render the intolerable acceptance. In this sense, Orwell's fable, fairy tale, political allegory persists not as a relic of a bygone revolutionary moment, but as an eerily resonant meditation on how power, once consolidated, dissolves the boundaries between species, where man and animal functions similarly, consolidating the power, perpetuating it through the manipulation of truth, memory, and collective perception. What the novel ultimately leaves us with is not a resolved argument, but a disquieting question. How might one inhabit a world in which language is uncertain, language is unstable, and the other always exceeds comprehension? It is in the presence of this question that Orwell's text continues to resonate, not as a closed allegory of the past, but as an open and unsettling meditation on the conditions of coexistence in a more than human world. I thank you, and I thank the chair for giving me the time to finish my paper.